Hi everyone, please support our videos on Patreon. The link's at the end of the video and in the down there part. Thank you, you're lovely. So having unmedicated ADHD is an experience. My mind likes to fixate on things for a while and then jump to something else. It usually cycles between the same three things: Star Wars, Warcraft, and Pokemon. Sometimes it switches back to Star Trek again for another round of Voyager. Sometimes it switches back to Kingdom Hearts and I replay the entire series again. Lily, is this why you had those 7 streams of Spider-Man games out of nowhere? Maybe. The point is that last week, the drawer labeled Harry Potter, which has previously been boarded over and welded shut, burst open again for the first time in 6 years, which was a strange experience because I hadn't really thought about Harry Potter with anything except content since J.K. Rowling started doing her best impression of a dying horse. So in the effort of not engaging with the work in any way that benefited Rowling, I busied myself by rereading Magical Metamorphosis, a fic where Harry turns out to be a trans girl because that felt appropriate given the current climate. Then I replayed the Deathly Hallows Part 2 game because it's not on sale anymore and also it's kind of underrated. But then a genius idea hit me. The perfect way to kill time before my adult brain shifts again. I'm gonna make fun of J.K. Rowling for being a sad baby loser. So here's the thing, J.K. Rowling is not a good writer. And part of the reason she's not a good writer is because she is a child. Her understanding of the world creatively, philosophically, and socially is infantile and mired in this idea that everything needs to stay exactly the same as it was when Tony Blair was Prime Minister, and any change either backwards or forwards is evil. She's just a mean, callous person overall. There's a lot of talk about separating the artist from the art, but putting aside the fact that you can't do that with anything, you really can't do that with Harry Potter, because J.K. Rowling, being a fucking brat, can't stop going on tangents about all the people she hates, like fat people, and trans women, and ugly people, and trans women, and conservative politicians, and trans women, and slavery abolitionists, and trans women. J.K. Rowling has the temperament of a 13-year-old girl with a negligent mother, just constantly needing to take every moment possible to be the most catty bitch imaginable to people who never did anything to her, except conservative politicians, because that one's kind of fair. The reason you can't separate the artist from the art is because J.K. Rowling refuses to be separated from it. Rowling herself believes that most people are on her side, they're just too afraid to say anything, but then again, Rowling has a disconnect from reality that psychiatrists could spend years studying. But it makes sense that she believes this because her transphobia is all over those books. It's hard to separate Harry Potter from Rowling's transphobia because you can't excise the main villain whose entire character is just one big walking compilation of every single thing TERFs believe about trans women. The first thing we learned about him from before he was Voldemort was that he went into the girls' bathroom and killed a cis girl with his evil snake monster. You don't really get more on the lack of nose than that. But entire essays have been written about J.K. Rowling's ineptitude as a writer. I'm not necessarily here to talk about that. I just need to open with that because Potterheads have been coping for quite some time. What I want to talk about is how Rowling's career post-Harry Potter has largely been a flop. The Fantastic Beasts movies do not do very well at the box office, Cursed Child was a critical laughingstock, and most of her adult books are so bad she started agitating for controversy to sell copies. It's clear she's been riding on the Wizarding World license and makes most of her money from licensing fees given to other people. So how exactly did that happen? Well, this all circles around to a topic I've discussed in the past, namely children's entertainment going dark and mature. Something that people always pretend they want, and even cheered on Harry Potter when it did that around book 5, but the problem is that despite very clearly trying to write adult literature, J.K. Rowling just can't do that because she is a fundamentally incurious person who doesn't care about other people, and all of her ideas amount to the heroes themselves over the course of the series are presented as growing from childhood to adulthood, confronting a world of clearly corrupt and untenable class injustice, racism, conspiracy, mistruth, manipulation, long-standing abuse of authority, and even chattel slavery. And the main hero's ultimate takeaway from all this, after understanding all the bad stuff and defeating the monster that helped create it, is that he's going to be alright because his parents left him a shitload of money, so he might as well become a cop. The world of Harry Potter is dull, devoid of imagination and wonder, and so philosophically lazy that it shows all these injustices in the system the Wizarding World operates under and does nothing about any of them, which makes sense because J.K. Rowling is not someone who politically advocates for cultural evolution. Harry Potter's flaws were being wallpapered over by the fact that these books were being enjoyed largely by an audience of children, whose only concern was the 3 kids and imagining themselves in their place. It captured the millennial wish fulfillment fantasy of getting out of your crummy normie town because you are the special, which has remained such a universal fantasy that the entire young adult dystopia genre was built up around it. Indeed, despite the fact that Harry Potter had a lot going on, much of it hastily slapped together, most readers only focused on Harry, Ron, and Hermione, or in the case of books 4, 6, and 7, Harry and Hermione. Indeed, that part of it does hold up, and they remain the only parts of those books that are good. I have two favorite scenes in the entire series. The first comes from the fourth book, shortly after Harry's name comes out of the Goblet of Fire and he has his falling out with Ron, and he goes down to get breakfast and Hermione is there waiting with a stack of toast asking if he wants to go outside. The second is in the film Deathly Hallows Part 1, where Harry and Hermione are just easing some tension by dancing and being silly and just being 17. Indeed, the friendship between these two is about the only thing I remember fondly. Hell, the Deathly Hallows book came out when I was 15. Is it any wonder most of what was wrong with it flew over our heads at the end of the day? Most readers just didn't care about anything that wasn't these three having adventures together. A hypothetical version of this book that is absolutely amazing would just be about the day-to-day lives of these three kids in school. Most of the story is basically episodic school comedy. A lot of people say these books get good when they have more dark themes, but millennials thoughtlessly say that about everything and they never really mean it. J.K. Rowling's writing only works when it's aimed at children because children will largely focus on the most viscerally satisfying element of the story, that being the only good part. Why else would the biggest fight in the Harry Potter fandom end up being, why the fuck does Hermione fall in love with a guy who treats her like shit? A question that the filmmakers apparently had too, given the fact that Harry and Hermione's friendship is a lot softer than in the books, and Ron is made to be an even bigger dick than he already was. The truth is, a lot of the non-character stuff and darker parts of the story is bad. It's boring, it's philosophically lazy, it's filled with MacGuffins that are introduced in one book and forgotten in the next. The whole dark wizard thing is only interesting insofar as it relates to the main characters. If all three characters didn't have some relation to Voldemort's blood purity garbage, then the conflict would not have been as interesting. The main trio are a pure-blood wizard who hates this fascist crap, a half-blood wizard who represents everything Voldemort despises about himself and uses blood purity to overcompensate for, and a muggle-born witch who is directly targeted by the system. If this were not the case, the Voldemort plotline would not be engaging or interesting. He would just be a generic bad guy that the hero has to stop for no other reason than because he's a good person. Holy fate of destiny, Batman! Ironically, the whole Chosen One plot introduced later in the book is completely superfluous. Harry doesn't need an external motivation to kill Voldemort. He already has a perfectly good reason to want to kill him. Vengeance! And people were pointing out inconsistencies in writing flubs as early as book 3. J.K. Rowling's backpedaling and adversarial approach to criticism started early. People were calling her out back then that her writing was terrible and her claims of planning everything in the 90s was a load of horseshit. That just all flew over the heads of kids, which is why the notion that these books are bad hit them in the face so hard. I remember when I was a kid there was a real push to get kids to read, largely because English classes in the public school system overwhelmingly favor self-described classics that only offered the perspectives of old white men, discouraged kids from criticizing these books, and made reading them a massive slog. And this had the knock-on effect of making kids hate reading because they'd taken something that was previously fun and made it into work. But then Harry Potter came out and was instantly popular with kids. So popular that they would read every single one in a week. And these are not short books, especially not this one. I think this officially qualifies as a weapon. But there was always the question of why these books weren't discussed in class, and the answer was usually they were disposable garbage. Something we just assumed was stuffy grown-ups being stuffy, but as has been demonstrated, people who read these books as adults generally do not have good things to say about them. It's not that the books only look bad in hindsight because J.K. Rowling is a centrist chauvinistic ghoul, though she definitely is. They were always like that, and you were just 10. Hell, nostalgia and their status as being core elements of a lot of kids' formative years is pretty much the only reason anyone still clings to it. The thing about Irrational fandom is that for all their defenses of problematic material, it's always around their right to enjoy it, not about its quality. I first noticed this with Steven Universe in that responses to criticism of the show was never refutation. Nobody ever argues that this show is actually good. They just shift blame for all of its problems away from the executive producer. A similar thing happens with Harry Potter. Nobody ever defends these books as actually good literature that is worth being studied. They just whine about how it was important to them as a kid, and can't they just keep having fun? Why does J.K. Rowling being a bitch mean we have to stop having fun? Can't you separate the artist from the art? That's an easy thing for cis fans to do, but for trans Harry Potter fans, it's hard to ignore a lot of that because this is what J.K. Rowling thinks trans people are. Nostalgia is the only reason people cling to it. They remember loving it as a kid, and that memory is about the only thing that matters to them.
For years I clung to the memory of it, then the memory of the memory, and then nothing. The Seldarine took that from me too.
largely because Potterheads refuse to read a different book ever, but also just because as adults they can't avoid seeing the problems with it on rereads. J.K. Rowling's writing was being carried by childhood whimsy, which is why we get the Fantastic Beasts, which is everything Potterheads claim they want. It's dark, it's moody, it's serious, it has the same approach to color grading as a PS3 era shooter, and it pretends to be about serious issues like Grindelwald, who is apparently someone important. But this is where the magic bleeds away, because this is explicitly a series of films for adults, carrying all the same story beats as Harry Potter, except for the three best friends going to magic school together. You know, the only good part of those books. And J.K. Rowling cannot write adult literature because she has the artistic and social capacity of a 13-year-old. She can't write serious stories, she can't write villains, she can't write romance, at least not intentionally, and all of her attempts to connect the two stories are some of the most pathetically desperate attempts to be seen as a smart writer, because J.K. Rowling has always hated the fact that people don't believe her when she says she planned everything from the start. It also doesn't help that the good guys are embarking on a mission to ensure World War II happens and isn't stopped by the bad guy, because Grindelwald wants to prevent the Holocaust. Ah, the 2010s model of writing villains. Step 1, make the world a better place and somehow. Step 2, Step 3, genocide. You know, before this, Grindelwald was just Voldemort, but instead of being a proxy representation of what she thought trans women were, he was a proxy representation of what she thought gay men were. He just wants to kill all the muggles and reign supreme as Wizard King. Why the fuck does he need to have some stop World War II motivation behind that as well? Aside from the fact that Rowling got really mad about the fact that people were asking why the wizards didn't stop Hitler. This is just J.K. Rowling's entire philosophy. You want to make the world a little less terrible for people? Sounds like communism to me, Chief. It's no wonder her stories are always so poorly received by adult audiences that weren't already fans of her previous work. Because she's not an adult. She's a child. She thinks like a child. She has an understanding of the world that a child does. She cannot comprehend things being different, and if they become different, she throws a tantrum. I'd go as far as to say that J.K. Rowling's anger at trans people has nothing to do with trans people directly. She robotically parrots the same turf talking points at all times, and has never really had a thought on her own on the subject. Her actual anger is at the fact that the established notion of gender is changing at all. She likes the status quo in all things, and to her, people affecting positive change are equally as evil as people affecting negative change. But it's not just her conservative politics, it's also the fact that the Wizards not doing anything about World War II is a cheeky little plot hole, a signifier that Rowling was making all of this up as she goes along, and that's something Rowling has been trying to deny for years. She wants people to think that she had everything planned from the start, which is what every bad writer wants people to think, and she's been backpedaling and retconning for years to try and make it look like she doesn't make mistakes, which has been a source of mirth for people for quite some time. How long have you been holding that Nagini secret? Only for around 20. No, you fucking weren't, you stupid fuck. You came up with that the week before the film started shooting. God, you were so fucking sad. And this is probably patient zero for why you should never believe a writer who has to brag about having everything planned from the start. Personally, I will never get tired of bad writers desperately trying to convince people that an idea they had that morning was actually planned a decade ago. It's hilarious, it's pathetic, and it's a sobering reminder that someone being a published author or working professionally in the industry doesn't award them a place of reverence or authority. And this is why her work so frequently fails to capture an adult audience, because most adults who have money to spend on her films grew out of that mindset when they were 16. And when people say they want this kind of faux serious storytelling, they're always lying. J.K. Rowling fundamentally needs to grow up. She needs to stop being a spoiled little brat angry about the fact that the hedges are different than they were yesterday. But she never will, and this is why her work will only ever appeal to kids for whom all of this flies over their heads. But hey, at least we now know that when Rowling sees a fat guy, she immediately thinks about his penis. Just like when she sees a trans woman, she immediately thinks about her penis. When dealing with a cock-obsessed woman-child like Rowling, it's important to remember that on some level it really bothers her that the only thing that really resonated with people from any of her writing, the only thing people remember fondly, and the thing that has been carrying her entire career are these two characters. And every time she's done something without them, the mockery comes out because she's just a bad writer. She's always been a bad writer, and the reasons Harry Potter succeeded are not the reasons she wished it had succeeded. As much as some diehard Potterheads were huffing the copium for way too fucking long, a lot of people just stopped taking Rowling seriously a long time ago. She was a target of mockery long before she was a target of scorn and hatred, and her presumed feminist beliefs have been known to just be chauvinism in a dress for a very long time. When people talk about the fall of J.K. Rowling, it's important to remember that between the period where she was adored and the period where she was hated, there was a very long period where she was only barely tolerated. I mean, remember when she said that wizards would shit themselves where they stood? A lot of people didn't need a mourning process to let go of J.K. Rowling. A lot of people just grew up and gained real literacy skills. Incidentally, chauvinism in a dress perfectly describes damn near every filthy little turf on the planet.